to the wonderful Charlie Beddoes. He's going to come and talk about Overdriven. Can you give a massive cheer, please, for Charlie Beddoes?
Now for something completely different. But I would like to say, as a creative, as a musician, maths is really useful if you're a musician, so they're not exclusive. That's what I'd like to say. So I'm talking to you tonight about, I've written a book. It's called Overdriven, the true story of a girl with a dirty bass sound and more ambition than sense. And I'm going to talk to you about being an overdriven woman and why I'm overdriven and what that's kind of led to. So I feel I should probably give you a content warning. By day I'm a lecturer at music uni and I teach cultural theory and have to do a sort of disclaimer in case any of the students get sort of triggered and upset. So I'll do a sort of a little content warning for you. So this talk includes sex, drugs and rock and roll. Some of it's quite dark and some of it should be funny. It's okay to laugh at both. And the final thing to say is, I'm okay now. Don't worry. Okay. So yeah, it's called Overdriven, my book, but reading my notes, I'm wondering if it should actually be called Oversharing at this point. But these days we're all addicted to people oversharing, aren't we? Like, I probably know more about the Kardashians than I know about my own family and friends. And even Nick Cave's got in on the act now with his Red Hand files and his In Conversation With. So it's like transparency is the new mystery, I think. So, why did I write my book? You may wonder. Well, it's because I've had a lot of situations in my life where I felt I wasn't heard, I didn't have a voice. I've lived my whole life as an outsider in countercultures and subcultures. I didn't mean to, it just kind of worked out that way, accidentally. So I thought it was a story people might be interested to hear. And some of those situations in which I didn't have a voice and I wasn't heard was my kind of bizarre childhood. I was groomed by a boss at an early age. I was a squatter on the dole for quite a long time. Then I was a female rock musician. And now I'm getting old. So they're all things that as a woman I don't feel I had much of a voice. Through sort of writing this book and talking to people about it, I've kind of realised that quite a lot of people have stories like this, and hopefully me telling mine will sort of empower other people to tell theirs as well. So, some background info. This is my mother when she was about 20, so this would have been in the late 50s, and she was kind of a bit ahead of her time. She was a career girl, an accounts clerk. She lived in a bedsit to get away from her family, which wasn't really done by single girls back in the late 50s. And then she married quite late and had me at 29. And then she had postnatal depression. She had a massive, severe nervous breakdown and ended up having electric shock therapy. And she was never really the same again after that. So here's a little bit from my book from 1968 when I was 3. Mum's crying in her nightie, so I'm crying too. Dad has a suitcase. He's very flustered but determined. It's nearly Christmas, but there's no decorations. Dad says he's going away for a few days and leaves. I don't think he's coming back. Mum sleeps a lot and I wander around the house by myself. Everywhere is getting dirty. There are lots and lots of milk bottles all along the sideboard and on the ironing board. They smell of sour milk. Mum scrubs one in the sink until it's shiny like a diamond and puts it on the doorstep for the milkman. The rest stay. So this was the start of my mum becoming what was, then we didn't have a word for it, but now we call it being a hoarder. This isn't my actual house, but this is kind of similar to what my house looked like. So now it's on reality TV and we were like laugh and joke about it. But back then it was like, you know, there was always that house down the road with the overgrown front garden where the mad witch woman lived who ate children. Well, that was my house, basically. But the hoarding is a really bizarre kind of condition. In my mum, it took the form of the fact that nothing that ever came into the house ever left unless it was carefully controlled, like the milk bottles being polished. So for example, yoghurt pots had to be boil washed and the pattern scrubbed off them before they could go in the bin, and paper had to be torn into equal sized squares. So probably the tidiest place in the whole house was inside the dustbin. But anything that left the house had to be immaculately presented, and that included me. But no one really talks about the effects on the children of the mentally ill, kind of parenting your parent, dealing with their shit from an early age. Wow, that looks horrible, that picture, doesn't it? But anyway, weird disconnect between consensus reality and the reality you live in behind closed doors. And I thought everyone lived in a house full of rubbish, and I wondered how they tidied up so quick when I went round unexpectedly. But anyway, this led to some interesting coping strategies. Some of my favourite obsessions here, we've got Ironside, do you remember him?
Yeah.
TV Detective, The Fairies, and Donny Osmond. Any of whom I really hoped would come and collect me and that I could escape at any point. Sadly they didn't. But the other effect that my weird childhood had was most children live in the present, but children who live in difficult situations, I think, live in their fantasy lives and in the future. And it had this effect of almost like pulling back the catapult really, really, really far, so that when I could finally escape on my 17th birthday, it was like, pow, this momentum that like propelled me as far away from my origins as I could possibly get. And so we'll see what happened. So, in the meantime, rock and roll saved my life at 16. I got in with a gang of older boys who adopted me like I was a mascot, and they educated me about cool stuff, about all the cool music, Sartre and Nietzsche, drugs, music, politics. I became a socialist and I wanted to tattoo a hammer and sickle on my arm. Luckily I was dissuaded, or I'd be sorry now, wouldn't I? I didn't actually identify as a feminist then, although I do now obviously, because feminism, when I was growing up, was something that had happened in the 60s, and it meant you had to wear dungarees, have short hair and hate men, and be very angry all the time. So I decided to invent the idea instead of being a femininist, which was kind of the same, but you were equal to men, but you could still look nice. This was my concept. Anyway, my first ambition, that I told them at careers at school, didn't meet with a very good reception, was to be a film director. And my social worker put me in touch with a friend who had a production company, and he gave me work helping on auditions. Do you remember this? The mini pops? A little bit sinister, isn't it? So my boss was auditioning little children in makeup, singing pop songs, and the idea later got appropriated by his good friend Mike Mansfield and turned into the mini pops. That was clue number one. Clue number two was the second lot of auditions that I helped him with. Turned out to be for a porn film. I was like 17 and very shocked. And he was basically grooming me. I didn't really know what grooming was then. I only realised what it was when it was a plot on Coronation Street a few years ago. But that's what he was basically doing. He was unsuccessful, but that kind of messed up my head quite a lot. So at that point, I took shitloads of LSD and decided I was going to be a pop star instead, thinking that the music industry would be less sexist than the film industry. Well, you may be shocked to this, but actually it is slightly, because that's how bad the film industry is. It's absolutely terrible in that way. So yeah, I was going to be a pop star. So my first thing that I did was I ran away to be a squatter on the Dole in Hackney. I thought that sounds like the sort of thing you should do to be a pop star. And this is where I formed my first band. I should give a content warning about the name. I didn't choose it. I don't know why it was chosen. Can't remember. But this is my first band. And this is from 1984 when I was 19. We start a band with Roz called Kicked in Cum. We believe that all music should be improvised like Throbbing Gristle, because otherwise you are stopping the muse from coming through. We despise pop music because it has had anything real taken out of it, although secretly I like some of it, like Wham and Prince. We have a drum machine playing military beats, and I play bass through a delay pedal, making swooping whale noises. Ian hits his guitar with a glass rod through lots of effects, and Roz shouts, "The fascist pigs are coming to get us, and there's something in the water poisoning our minds." So yeah, this was our attempt. Like, obviously we didn't get a record deal, but then some people did that sort of thing, and they did, so you know, you never know. Also at this point I became obsessed with Aleister Crowley. I think this was probably my adult extension of believing in the fairies. I thought that if I did spells, maybe I could like change my life and get out of the living in a squat on the dole and do something else. And so I started practicing sex magic and practicing the bass. So one of them obviously worked. But anyway, what I wanted was kind of pretty unknown at the time for a woman. I wanted to be good at bass like these people, Jean-Jacques Burnel from the Stranglers, Barry Adamson from Magazine, Jar Wobble from Public Image, and Tracy Pugh from the Birthday Party, who were all bass players that they weren't virtuosos, but they were sort of known for their sound. They kind of defined the identity of their bands. I wanted to be one of them. But there were no female role models doing this at all at the time. Probably at the time you could count the number of skilled female rock musicians on one hand, and most of them were in girls' school. But there was one actually in retrospect, but she sort of wasn't in my genre. But the only woman I can think of who equates with those is Tina Weymouth from Talking Heads. She's literally the only woman who occupies that same space. And even today, there are quite a few female bass players, but do you know their names?
Gayline Dorsey, tell which
Yeah, okay.
Susie Quattro.
She's old school, and she was a singer as well. I'm talking about people who were known for their bass sound, but not fronting things. Do you see what I mean? So, yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. But anyway, maybe the spells worked, or maybe it was practicing the bass that worked, because I got in with some people who worked at a recording studio, met some other musicians who could actually play. We wrote some songs, but we only ever did about 3 gigs. We were too busy mainly doing bucket bongs and too much speed. So this is from 1986, and Vince is the guitarist, you can see there. Vince can't get enough of doing speed. We get a grand most weeks. This week we're broke and we really want some, so we take my Watkins copycat tape delay down to Denmark Street and sell it for a £5 so we can buy a gram. When we've done the last line and there's no more left, Vince blows his nose on a slice of sun-blessed white bread to get the last dregs of speed out of his nostrils, and then eats it. Sorry, I just had to tell you that one. Sadly, space accident became a space accident. We kind of like fell apart due to insanity. But at this point in my life, I bought this rather splendid bass. I'd seen it in a shop and kind of fell in love with it. This is a rare handmade vintage BC Rich Bitch 8-string bass. It's strung like a 12-string guitar with doubles, but it's a guitar string and a bass string. So you can kind of sound like Led Zeppelin on your own if you play a riff. And it's unique because it has 2 10-watt preamps built in, which is like having a fuzz pedal. And this was 1987. No one had fuzz bass in this country until 1994 or 5, when Boss invented the bass distortion pedal. So at least I was on the beginning of having this very distinctive sound, which I later kind of got a bit of a reputation for. And then I was in several bands, but the one that kind of came good, or it looked like it was going to come good, is after literally hundreds of auditions and adverts and trying to steal band members, we got this band together, Rub Ultra. We were like Rage Against the Machine meets the Smashing Pumpkins, and for once we had the zeitgeist and everyone loved us, and there was a major record company bidding war. This is from '94. One of the companies that are interested is East West Records. We go to their office to meet the head A&R guy who used to play bongos in Haircut 100. He's very enthusiastic and says he loves it because we are girls and guys and black and white. He is bouncing up and down on his chair going, multiracial, multisexual, let's do it. I'm secretly ecstatic and think I am like Malcolm McLaren because the band I got together is shaking up the industry and making rock cool again with all these people who hated it a year ago. So yeah, we kind of were like riding the wave for a little while. Everyone thought we were the next big thing. We were kind of a bit mental. We chose all the people we worked with based on their star sign. Here's a little bit of this band, Rob Ultra, with Johnny Vaughan, a young Johnny Vaughan introducing. Oh, sound?
Yeah.
London-based five-piece Rob Ultra describe themselves as testosterone and crackle with a female underbelly. They claim that aliens attend their concerts and tell us that their ambition is to give music liquid roots. Naked City says, it was never like this with Jerry and the Pacemakers, probably.
If you think about it, we were kind of like the Spice Girls, if you think about it, you know, like basically, and actually it was the same time as the Spice Girls, and I temporarily fulfilled that ambition of being known as a bass player, like the bass player from The Wedding Present that said I was an influence. James Dean Bradfield from the Manics was like, oh, you're that girl with that mad bass, and the bass player from Therapy said if he died I had his job in his will. And a very unknown band at the time, a little band, supported us on tour, and they were a band called Muse. And all bass players now play with effects pedals because Muse did, and he got it off me. But I'm never going to get any credit for that. Anyway, sadly, we split up in Rockfield Studios making a very expensive album over whose turn it was to make the tea and how to mix a Swanee whistle that we'd ill-advisedly put on a track for some reason. So yeah, that was the demise of Rob Ultra, which was kind of very sad because we were in a scene with Feeder and Skunk and Anansie, and you know, they're still together, so you know, maybe we could have gone all the way. But then after that, I became a session musician after another couple of bands, and played with some well-known people, got to tour all around Europe, play all the major European festivals, Wembley Arena, the Royal Albert Hall with Sting, and I was really happy as I was in my late 30s by this time, and I'd been told at 24 that I was too old for the music industry, so that taught them. So yeah, life became about drunken dancing on tables and falling in love with French men on tour and generally behaving badly and irresponsibly, probably for the first time in my life. And at this point I met a younger guy who was a guitarist, and we fell in love, and I experienced some prejudice for that as well, for being a so-called cougar, which I hate that word, just it sounds predatory, but that wasn't the reality. But he actually kind of believed in me and said, Charlie, you can front your own band and I'll play in a band with you and I'll write songs with you. And he gave me the confidence to front my own band for the first time. So we had several incarnations over the next 17 years. There's some of them. And but we did turn into a bit of a Spinal Tap on account of the huge amount of drummers. But here's a little bit of some of my bands that are more recent. So although creatively this was probably the best stuff I'd ever written, I was now well into my 40s, and even I couldn't defy convention and get a record deal for the first time in my 40s or 50s. Sadly, that wasn't going to happen. And also I discovered that front women get judged completely differently. As a bass player, I'd been judged on my playing. The minute I crossed that boundary and became a front person, it's all about how you look. It's very superficial. You know, like I'd do a gig and play bass solos, and the review would go, "Oh, you know, that band was quite good, but Charlie's got very frizzy hair. Doesn't she know there's product for that?" And I'm like, "Hold on, what about my bass solo?" But anyway, it was quite difficult because it felt like no one really wanted to listen to some old bird squawking about slugs and snails and being angry at this point. And then disaster struck. Dun dun dun. The menopause. So this is 2016. I feel like a shriveled husk of my former self, and my personality is warped beyond recognition, and it's like I'm redundant and have no place in the world and am invisible. No one ever explained how it would feel when you have the menopause. You spend your whole adult life in this cycle of hormones and emotions, going up and down all the time, like you're linked to nature and the moon and light and other women. But then suddenly you're cut off from it all. It feels like being excluded from humanity. So weirdly, only humans and 2 species of whale have the menopause. Weird, God knows why. It's like nature sort of forgot about us. But actually there's been a lot of research done into the whales, not into humans for some reason. And they've discovered in the whales something called the grandmother effect, which means that if you're a male whale and your mum is postmenopausal, you have a greater chance of survival than the other male whales. Who knew? So the grandmother effect. But I don't have any children, so I ain't no grandma. So what am I going to do now? Anyway, hence, that's why I've written the book, to sort of, because I've got to do something, let's face it. Might be too old to rock, but I'm not too old to talk about rock. So, in case you're interested, there's the kids do this. It's a QR code, and Linktree. All the kids also told me about this. It's a place where you can put all your stuff. So, if you're interested in hearing any of my music, and there's some quite famous people that I played with, but I didn't want to go into that now. But if you go on my Linktree, you can actually do a bit of detective work and find out who some of the famous people were. So I hope you've enjoyed my peculiar story, and I'm finishing with a tiny bit more from the end of my book, from 2022. I know everyone says they feel like a teenager inside forever, but it's not just a case of feeling the same. It's like I haven't grown up at all, and I'm still completely driven by angst. But on the outside, I'm turning into an old person, and there are only 2 roles for older women in this world: storyteller or witch. Guess I'll have to be one of them then, or both. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Charlie Beddoes. Thank you so much, Charlie. Excellent work.